All right, so this documentary is really good. Um, it got me really hyped. It really gave me high hopes for hopefully our future. And a lot of the things that they talked about were just like I like the I think my favorite thing about the scenes is that nobody really knows in the moment what's happening, right? Like
Yeah,
they have an idea of something like special going on, but they don't really understand the capacity of what it is. You know what I mean? And that's
yeah,
that's like probably my favorite, most exciting thing about it. About being part of the scene is just not knowing where it's gonna go, where it's gonna take you.
yeah,
Like
yeah. Not
and
knowing it's like part of history.
Yeah, and it's interesting to see it from that perspective because like from our perspective, we already know we're in the future. Like we know these bands end up being amazing, but you're seeing in the documentary through their eyes and friends and people they know, like while it's happening, and no one has any idea. Like
Yeah,
with the exception of the Strokes, which for some reason, like this is a band which while I was watching this documentary, I kept thinking about our versus debate, and I feel like it definitely gives you much more credibility within the Strokes versus Arctic Monkeys debate. Like
yeah,
I think by watching this, you have to put the Strokes at least on par with the Arctic Monkeys because you know, and this is coming from band, not just like regular fans or whatever. Like these are the bands that are kind of talking about and they put the Strokes on this fucking pedestal, bro, because and it's kind of true, bro, because you see like from the get-go, from the rip, these motherfuckers are awesome.
yeah,
They bring this energy and vibe to the stage that's kind of unmatched, and like
yeah.
you know so the documentary kind of follows it's kind of hard to tell. Is it primarily following? Is it just like a compilation of different bands? Like I don't know who exactly is doing this documentary. Um,
Yeah. So the documentary is done by, I think it's Lizzie Goodman. She's
mhm.
like a music like journalist. But so just like an overview of this documentary, is kind of capturing the New York revival of like underground music that took place in the started in late '99 and through the early 2000s. Because like what we
Mhm.
talked about before on the podcast is how there was that movement that started in Greenwich Village with folk music in the '60s, and then
Mhm.
pop music, punk music in like the '70s and '80s out of CBGBs and in Bowery, in Bowery
Yeah.
section of Manhattan. So fast forward to 1999, which they all mentioned before is like how a lot of these people came to New York in hopes of like um, finding like good musicians, good underground musicians, but it's kind of like this time that time has kind of passed. Well, there hasn't really
Yeah.
been that kind of scene
Because
here
if
in a
you
while.
remember from before too, in the '90s is kind of when like the bands that whole like band scene kind of died out a little bit and got more to like the poppy scene. Like the it girl, like or the boy bands, the
Yeah,
R&B bands, like it very much started shifting over there, and the whole rock band template was kind of pushed to the background,
yeah,
unless like there were some bands that had success, but it was like very
yeah,
much mainstream bands, and the whole
yeah,
idea of like alternative music got very much pushed into the background.
yeah. Like at this point, it's like Limp Bizkit, Blink
Yeah.
182, Green Day. Those are like
Hmm.
the bands that are like people are
Yeah,
paying
and
attention
like
to.
this is when punk and these bands that previously might have been considered alternative is also in a sense becoming mainstream at this point.
Yeah,
With what's available now. So now because alternative music by definition can never be mainstream, right? It's always got to find a new host to be like, okay, this is the new people that are going to carry me, So that's basically what happens at this point, where it's like the old alternative becomes the mainstream, and the new alternative is looking for a home. And I feel like that kind of captures this documentary precisely. That's how it starts off. It's
yeah,
basically alternative music is looking for a home within New York City, and how does the path and the journey that it takes,
Yeah.
and so okay, so the reason why I asked that question about the documentary is because, at least in my perspective, it was kind of like it jumps around a lot. It follows a lot of bands. It's all within pretty much New York City. I think they kind of jump to UK for a little bit, but it primarily deals with New York City, and it kind of jumps between a few bands, but still like they have like the Yeah Yeah Yeahs were one of the early bands that were with the Strokes touring. They had bands like Interpol. Um, who else?
So eventually it was LCD Sound System,
Yeah,
TV on the radio, The
TV on the
Rapture,
radio, the Rapture.
and then like
Um,
other bands. Like there's a couple bands I'd never heard of, like Liars, Oneida, Moldy Peaches. Moldy Peaches is how it started. That was the
yeah,
first
Moldy
band.
Peaches was how it started. So one of the guys from Moldy Peaches, he was in New York City looking for looking for the scene, basically alternative music.
Yeah,
And there was like things here and there, but people weren't even really, like it wasn't there. Like, like it wasn't the same. People were like still searching for it. They had small little venues and little scenes going on,
yeah.
and it was a cool community. It started off very, very small and slow. But yeah, and then basically like from the get go of the documentary, it's kind of like the Strokes exist, and they're early. They've just been playing for about a year at the point, but they're like the hot shit. Like it's kind of just this like known thing that they're gonna be amazing. Like they bring this energy
Yeah.
and vibe to the stage, and I think the guy says like the first time he met Julian was like in a bathroom, and Julian's doing drugs, and he's fucking wilding out, and the
Yeah, so
guy,
they were at a party and like someone was talking about, "Yo, you gotta hear listen to this band, like they're really
yeah.
good." And they go to a party and he's just like, yeah, fucking going
Yeah, and
insane.
and like he meets the guy, he meets Julie in the bathroom, and he realizes like that's the guy of the band. He's like, holy fuck, this guy's insane. I have to listen to this band. Like they got to be
Yeah,
amazing. And sure enough, they fucking blow the roof off. And so the documentary I feel like the documentary kind of keeps bouncing back between the Strokes' success and how the scene is in entirety is shifting by going through the perspectives of a bunch of different bands.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, so then you start with like the Moldy Peaches, and then they end up finding Karen
um,
O from the
yeah,
Yeah Yeah Yeahs, who solo was an amazing musician. Like she had some really good like acoustic songs. Like she was
yeah,
kind of killing it by herself, but she was also bored. Like she wasn't really feeling it performing and stuff like that. So she met up with that guitarist. I forgot his name. Something
Nick,
Zinner,
I forget,
Nick
Nick, I
Zinner or
forget. His,
something like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
And she knew a drummer too, which I'm not gonna remember his name either. But basically, yeah, they formed the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, and it was also cool hearing from her perspective because she wasn't that persona that you see her as. That was interesting for me because it's like I feel like what she said, like she was like, she wasn't the popular girl in school, whatever, and like when you see her, you can see that, like, like she doesn't like glamour herself up in that way, but on the contrary to that statement, brings a very like sexy aura to her, which is really interesting because in the documentary she felt like the music gave her the opportunity to express herself in that way when normally she wouldn't. She was kind of like a loner. I don't know about a
yeah,
loner, but she was definitely like ostracized from like a lot of things. It seems
yeah.
like.
Well, the thing is, because like she talks about she's mixed, she's half Korean, half just white.
Yes,
So
exactly.
she
Yeah,
always felt like she was like too Korean for the white kids, too white for the Korean kids. That
yeah. Always,
that in
always
between
this
there.
sense of not fitting in. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So, and then when she was on stage, she could just let it rip, and I felt
yeah,
like she could do whatever she wants, and it's just fucking cool. Like that's the beauty of like these bands. They have this kind of like they have the perfect balance of like nonchalant, like I don't give a fuck, but not to the point where like we sound like shit. Like we still know what we're
yeah,
doing up here, but we give just enough zero fucks to give off that cool persona and vibe, because they all
yeah,
have that same feeling, when I listen to the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, when I listen to the Rapture, the Strokes, it's like this is a very loose like a lot of freedom went into writing this song, but it's still cohesive,
yeah.
and like, yeah. That's one of my favorite parts about alternative music. It's like how do we push the envelope to the point where it's different, but we're still not like losing people, you know?